inside of that synagogue. I'm joined right now by Malcolm Nance. Malcolm, let's get your insights into probably the derivation of this. It has been a heightened time in society. There's been a lot of horrible rhetoric back and forth. How much do you believe that that may be a contributing factor to this terrorism that we are seeing unfold this morning?
It's possibly a contributing factor. And the reason that I say this, and I know that guys like Clint Van Zandt and Clint Watts and Jim Kavanaugh will back me up. We often see these incidents occur in pairs or threes, and there's a saying in the community: the second attack is always an American, if it's an internationalist type attack. But, you know, people like to, terrorists and people who aspire to create a high visibility incident, they want that visibility. They want to actually be there and in the face of the community. Terrorism itself, which is what this is going to be, I don't care whether it's a hate crime or not. When you take a Jewish synagogue on the day of Sabbath and create a hostage barricade, then you're committing an act of terrorism. You want the nation to have all eyes on you for whatever your personal or political motivation is. And the only factor we're missing here is, what is the motivation of the shooter? Right now, we know, number one, his motivation, it was to kill Jews in their place of worship on the day of the Sabbath. And that tells that, I mean, we could branch out to 100 different places as to what that person may be up to. But right now, it appears that we're in a barricade situation with an active shooter, and it appears Pittsburgh police and SWAT and apparently the FBI are taking precautions to contain it.
I want to be adding to the conversation right now Jim Kavanaugh, whom I welcome under these situations. Jim, I'm looking at some information we've been getting, and this is of a news website that says there are those inside who complained that they were worried there might be an active shooter in the building. And then according to the Pittsburgh Police Dispatch, which I'm now looking at, it said that a second call said that they were definitely being attacked and came in, that they have shotguns. Multiple gunshots have been heard from the lobby, possibly as many as 20 to 30 shots. And again, this is at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And this is, yes, they're saying it. Earlier reports of definitely one down in the Tree of Life Synagogue, and several people in the building. Of course, there would be the Sabbath Saturday morning services there. Jim, let's talk about what law enforcement is going to be doing right this moment. Certainly, they have to keep themselves protected from somebody who may have a shotgun. But talk about the initial reports and the reaction from police there on the scene.
Yeah, well, they move quickly. The training is to move quickly to the point of engagement with the shooter. That's what the first responding patrol officers are going to do. In a situation like this, they're moving quickly to get to an engagement point with the shooter, to locate the shooter or shooters and to engage. SWAT comes on behind that. Patrol's first to arrive. We call them SWAT light because the patrolmen will get their long rifles out of their cars when they get a report of an active shooter, long rifles and shotguns out of their cars. But then they'll get to the point where, you know, maybe they can't advance anymore, maybe they can't drop the shooter. SWAT comes in behind. That's what you see, tactical officers coming in here. And like Malcolm said, we may have some sort of a barricade, you know, shooter at a high point. So this is a very, very exacerbated situation. And I agree with Malcolm. I mean, you can think about any kind of motive, but when you think of an attack on a synagogue, I mean, I can go back personally in history for 40 years, having been to so many attacks on synagogues and Jewish temples and houses of worship and churches, and I can tell you who has done them. And I've arrested them. I've arrested them in the act of doing it. We've caught them. We've charged them. And in America, historically, it has been neo-Nazis, Klansmen, and white supremacists. Now, worldwide, and as Malcolm can tell you, Al-Qaeda style terrorists, ISIS, they attack Jewish interests worldwide. I mean, they always have in Europe and, you know, across the Middle East. Jewish interests are always attacked by those kind of terrorists as well. So, but that who's generally is launching attacks on Jewish houses of worship. And, you know, I said earlier to Joy Reid, also one of the differences you get in an attack like this, if it's groups like I just described, you can get more than one shooter or bomber or killer or actor. You get more than one because it's not necessarily a disgruntled person who's mad at the congregation. which it could be, of course, but when you start getting into multiple people, shooters, that's a conspiracy of hate, a conspiracy of anti-Semitism. Like Malcolm pointed out exactly right, it's the Sabbath on Saturday, so that's where the people are gathered. That's where the attack they want to make. So, initial blush would be that. SWAT's there, on-scene command's there. We're not hearing any gunfire. That's a good sign. But does that mean that the shooters are isolated inside the synagogue somewhere? And do the shooters not have access to any more victims at the moment? And if SWAT can keep them contained, even if we go static for hours, if they're contained, then that's the best remedy.
Yeah, and right now, being able to look again at the Pittsburgh Police Dispatch as well as some local news reports, it would seem that officers came under fire as they came on the scene as well, having to use their cars for barricades and protection. And there are reports that 2 police officers have been shot. NBC's Rahema Ellis has phoned into the control booth. She is very familiar with this area here in the Pittsburgh area. Rahema, this Squirrel Hill area. Talk about the community.
Alex, this is a densely populated, upscale, beautiful community, actually. I used to live there in Pittsburgh for several years. I live not far from where this incident is occurring. It is, as I say, densely populated. It has a large Jewish population. And as you've been mentioning, this is happening on their day of worship, their Sabbath. And so I suspect, because it is such a popular synagogue, that it would have been crowded today. I don't know that for a fact, but I would think that it might be. It also is a community where you have single-family homes, mostly single-family homes, and it's in an area that is, there's a lot of businesses, there are restaurants, schools in the area. It's a heavily populated and very popular section of the city of Pittsburgh. It's one of the most popular communities in Pittsburgh that I used to spend a lot of time in myself. And it's a place for entertainment. It's also a wonderful place for people to live.
Rahema, we know in the wake of, I guess, the tenor in this country having become so fraught with discord, there are many churches which have taken to having actually members of the congregation be armed and standing vigil at the door. It is a remarkable time to say that is indeed the way congregants in different communities feel. Did you ever hear about anything like that for the Tree of Life congregation? Was there any indication that any of those in the Squirrel Hill community there felt that they may come under attack at some time and had taken measures to, keep themselves safe?
I can't speak with any certainty about that, but just as you're pointing out, the tenor of the times, that communities, synagogues, and churches all across this country are taking precautions. And we've seen it happen here in New York, where I live now. When you go past synagogues on a Saturday like today, there is security in place. I don't know what the situation was there in Pittsburgh, in Squirrel Hill, but it wouldn't surprise me if people were on guard, particularly as you're pointing out. Think of what we've been going through this week in this country, where there have been suspected explosive devices that have been picked up in several places here in New York City, but also people across the country have been on alert, on a high alert in many places across the country. So I think it's something that a lot of people really are thinking about, Alex.
As we see what appears to be a SWAT team, even potentially members of the military being deployed, we are also getting word from one news source that the NYPD is joining efforts in containing this situation. Let's go right now to the local reporter from WPXI. We have David Johnson, who's on the scene for us. Let's take a listen to what he's doing right now. He's interviewing some people in the community. Let's go right now to David Johnson.
Inside the synagogue, we have 3 officers who have been shot. And at this time, we have no more information because we are still clearing the building and trying to figure out if the situation is safe, if there are any more threats inside the building. So that's all we have at this point, but this shooter is in custody. We have multiple casualties and 3 officers shot. Thank you.
Can you take a step?
Richard, Mayor, could you add anything at all?
We're going to wait until
Once the situation stabilized.
Yeah, there's still a lot of information that's missed. We just got to wait and we want to be sure when we have everything. So we'll be coming back to you.
All right, as we said, these are always very chaotic and dangerous times. We are updating what we've heard, that 3 police officers have been shot. We do not know their condition, nor do we know the condition of anybody who may have been shot inside. There had been reports of fatalities, so those numbers have yet to be confirmed. We know that the president is watching this as well. He has commented. Let's go right now to NBC's Kelly O'Donnell's at the White House for us. Kelly, what is the president saying? And a good morning to you.
Good morning, Alex. The president has used Twitter to comment on this, and he did it in an unusually fast time frame, given the way these events are unfolding. The president tweeting that he's been watching the events in Pittsburgh. He says law enforcement is on the scene. Of course, things have developed since that time. He also states, looks like multiple fatalities. Beware of active shooter. God bless all. We just heard the update that the shooter is now in custody, but the president was talking about multiple fatalities. The president's tweet here indicates watching the event. So I don't yet know, and I've reached out to a number of White House officials, if he has had a specific briefing. Always the Situation Room is made aware of these kinds of crises that erupt. That's occupied 24 hours a day. The president is here at the White House and is expected to depart within the hour for 2 big events today, traveling to Indianapolis and then later to Illinois for a rally. We don't know if his schedule will be changed because of this or if there will be any alteration to his plans. We also don't know if the president would be available to comment about this on camera. We are here and will be looking for that. Typically, in a situation like this, the president may wish to comment once facts are determined. What we know is the president has been calling for civility and a level of change in tone. At the same time, there are many who have been criticizing him for the way he's conducted himself in this political environment. So the president has also been very demonstrable in the last 24 to 48 hours, praising law enforcement for their work in the mailed pipe bomb situation. The president, often a booster of law enforcement around the country, and clearly with the report of 3 law enforcement officials, 3 police officers being shot, according to the officials on the scene, this will without question, will raise this to the president's attention. So we will be watching this. Again, the White House would be monitoring, able to connect with law enforcement at every level, able to provide resources from the federal government, as well as being in touch with local officials elected as well as law enforcement. So we have reached out to White House officials to see if they have any additional insight, and we'll be watching as the president is expected to depart the White House within the hour. Alex?
Kelly, just one quick thought. I should think this would weigh heavily on the president, given that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is both culturally and religiously aligned with the Jewish faith, and his daughter has adopted the Jewish faith as well in her practice. They're raising their children that way. This may be something that, when you noted that he so quickly got on this, it would be something that potentially be very close to his heart.
Yes, and they keep Sabbath, and they would not be under normal circumstances in our interactions with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. They do not watch television, do not use electronic devices in observance of this day. That can sometimes be a complicating factor if you're a senior White House official. This kind of an incident would not be in their necessary area of responsibility. The Chief of Staff, John Kelly, the former Marine general, would certainly be responsible, as a number of others would be. Yes. But certainly when you talk about an issue that would have a family sense of sensitivity, that is also true. And obviously the president has a role to play whenever there is violence, and there has been so much attention in how he has handled events related to other incidents that this is a high bar for the president, where he will need to speak to the nation. We don't know when that will happen, but we are prepared and ready to go if he wants to make comment.
We have no doubt of that. Kelly O'Donnell at the White House, thank you for that. And for all of you just tuning in at the bottom of the hour, 11:30 here in the East Coast, but perhaps most notably in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, where we're keeping our eyes on an unfolding situation, we have word that in the Squirrel Hill residential community outside of Pittsburgh, that there has been an attack by a gunman with a shotgun at the Tree of Life Synagogue there. It is on Wilkins Avenue. And we heard from police authorities saying within the last 5 minutes or so that 3 police officers were shot. An active shooter situation remains In effect, though they believe they have the gunman in custody, they are still going through this congregation to figure out if there are any more victims or anybody else who may be hiding in fear of their life for what has happened. There have been reports of multiple fatalities. We do not have a confirmed number yet, so we are not going to go with what we believe to be the case until that is confirmed here at NBC News. We believe that there was about 60 to 100 people inside the synagogue at the time, this coming from the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh. Again, this is a popular synagogue, the Tree of Life Synagogue there in Squirrel Hill, as was described by NBC's Rahema Ellis a short time ago, familiar with that community, that it is a beautiful residential community, mostly single-family homes. We are seeing through reports, the New York Times and elsewhere, that there have been locals who were just going about their Saturday business who weren't necessarily inside of the Tree of Life Congregation Synagogue there for Shabbat Saturday morning services, and they were told by a plethora of SWAT and police officers on scene to stay inside, to not venture out. But clearly, as we give you a live picture as what is happening, we are still underway with an active situation, trying to figure out if there are any more shooters potentially out there or any other victims inside that synagogue. I'm joined right now by MSNBC senior criminal analyst Clint Van Zandt, also Clint Watts, MSNBC national security analyst. So gentlemen, Clint, we go to you so often in situations like this. Let's talk about the response. And you heard 3 police officers were shot. These are guys that were going into a situation up against a man with a shotgun, at least one person. We don't know if there are more. They had to use their cars for cover to begin with, and that sometimes can't be effective.
Well, one thing, it suggests how rapid a police response we have in this country. When you hear anything of shots fired at a man with a gun, realize this situation, we look at mass shootings, mass murders, we look at those numbers differently. But this shooting with at least 3 officers shot and reports of citizens inside, congregants being shot, this is like number 275 mass shootings we've had in the United States so far this year. So we've had a lot of practice on these.
We have a lot of issues that we are dealing with here as a country. Clint, stay on the line for a moment. Jonathan Deist is joining me, WNBC's lead investigative reporter. And I know that, Jonathan, as you join me on the phone, you've got some information to share?
Yes. Pennsylvania State Police have briefed various law enforcement agencies, and the preliminary information they are providing is that there's a total of 12 people who have been shot. 3 of them are law enforcement. There are numerous fatalities. They did provide a specific number of fatalities, but again, it is not firm. So I don't know if NBC wants us to say the number. I'll say it, but there's the caveat. They have a number preliminary of 8 dead, that the gunman was armed with an AR-style weapon, as well as 1 or 2 handguns, and that he is in custody. And they are going through the rest of the building to make sure it is now safe and secure. That is the preliminary update out of the Pennsylvania State Police. And again, I stress preliminary. The suspect did give a name. We have that name. They are running that name to see if it is, in fact, the accurate and true name of who the suspect is. And once we have confirmation of that, we will learn more about him. There are, of course, reports that he was saying anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic things as he went into that synagogue. But I think the key information is coming from Pennsylvania State Police to various law enforcement agencies. The initial reporting they are providing is that 12 people have been shot, 3 of them law enforcement, and there are multiple fatalities, and it appears the gunman is in custody.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Please stay with us as you gather more information. Clint and Jim, I'm going to get you guys in just a moment, but a little bit of information we're also getting. I just want to reiterate, we believe this, according to the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, that about 60 to 100 people were inside that synagogue. Now, typically, the Shabbat services begin about 9:45 a.m., and there are a much smaller group of people inside at that time, maybe only 20 to 30 for those early services. But reportedly, there was a bris ceremony slated to take place this morning for an infant, and that may be a reason for which the numbers appear to be swelled from a normal Sabbath morning inside the Tree of Life Synagogue. Clint, I'll bring you in as well to talk about, I guess, the fact that you've got more people in there. Well, how does that complicate things for anybody going in and trying to secure that building?
Well, we know that it appears the original target was the house of worship itself and the congregants in there. And you go in with whether it's a shotgun or an AR-15 and 2 handguns. I mean, this is someone who's armed in the teeth, and he went in there with the sole purpose of committing murder and mayhem. The only reason those numbers are smaller, it appears, and I admit it, the numbers are terrible with 12 injured and maybe 8 of those fatalities. But had it not been for the speed at which the police department responded, and their job is to respond, get on the scene, and to engage the gunman. I mean, he can't shoot 2 different directions at the same time. So those police officers on the scene, they're trying to engage him. They're trying to get him to shoot at them. You know, we always say this about police, ATF, FBI. We run to the gunfire. We don't run away from it. While that engagement is taking place, the police officers are hoping and maybe working from another side of that house of worship, trying to get all the congregants out of there as they can while they are engaged with this individual. But, you know, we just went through a terrible, challenging, stressful week for our country where hate was expressed. And it looks like this individual, and Jim Kavanaugh and I have talked about and Malcolm this week, about the strong probability that we're going to get a copycat in some way, shape, or form. Someone will be sitting on the edge of the emotional abyss and make a decision to jump off. It may not be a pipe bomb, maybe a handgun, maybe a shotgun, but it's probably not a mistake that this individual did this on this date. He may have planned it, looked at it, but one has to consider the possibility that everything else had happened this week in America provided the additional fodder to get this individual to do what he did. We'll find that out. Yep. Fortunately, because it appears he's been captured, this is somebody we can talk to, just like we had pipe bombs to look at last week. Yeah, and as I bring you into the conversation again, Jim Kavanaugh, again, I'm going to go over the numbers as have been preliminary reported by the Pittsburgh police, and NBC's Jonathan Dienst brought those to us. 12 people shot, to include 3 officers. Preliminary numbers are that 8 have been killed, but Jonathan has just allowed us an update saying that may go up. Those numbers may go up. So as we consider the weapons that are reportedly involved in this situation, Jim, an AR-style weapon and 2 handguns, and Clint's point, the speed with which police officers and SWAT teams got on scene there, when you think of this kind of carnage, is it likely that the AR-style weapon would have been used because of the speed with which it can dislodge the bullets?
Well, when you're carrying a long gun like that and you have handguns, normally you're carrying the long gun as your primary weapon. So just like these tactical officers, you see their long gun, slung over their shoulder. That's what they're using. It's the primary. The secondary weapon, the handgun, is in the holster on the side. And sometimes we even carry the third gun, another handgun, on a vest in the front. So your primary weapon is the long gun. The shooter most likely went in and he started his attack, and we know from the police report through Jonathan Dienst, great reporting there, that he was saying anti-Semitic slogans. So we're already getting a picture of the motive, and we talked about that at length with Clint and Malcolm also, that the target also sometimes gives us the motive, and we talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. So we have a target, which is indicative of motive, a synagogue, and now we have the shooter saying anti-Semitic talk. That's motive. He has the long gun. He starts shooting. The call comes into 9/11. I don't know, and we don't know if those officers shot are patrol or SWAT, but most likely they're patrol. It's the first arriving patrol because they're pinned to their cars. The reason they're pinned down to their cars is he's got a long gun, like an AR-15. So he can come out the window And many officers have been shot and killed like this with those kind of weapons. In fact, Pittsburgh had 3 officers murdered with the shooter, a neo-Nazi, had a Kalashnikov in 2009. 3 officers in Pittsburgh. Now, this is a suburb. But, I mean, so anyway, he comes out when the officers arrive in their patrol car, and he can drop them and wound them. Now, that's a SWAT Bearcat vehicle you're looking at. You can see the turret on the top where they can shoot gas. It's armor-plated. You can see the SWAT officer in the back. That vehicle is pulled directly up to the door of the synagogue. Likely SWAT pulled it up there. They can check the door. They can use the vehicle as cover. They can make an emergency entry if they have to get wounded out.
Yeah.
One of the dangers is there's wounded who are bleeding. So you got to make an entry also, not only the officers, but other wounded who are bleeding. And you got to try to get them out so they don't bleed to death.
Yeah, and we have seen, actually in our live video here, we have been watching how there have been injured taken away on stretchers, not certain if they were congregants or police officers, and being rushed to ambulances, being taken to the hospital. I just want to give an update again. This is according to local news there on the scene, that indeed the suspect surrendered and he was injured in this melee this morning. And the reports are confirming, at least with another source, that at least 8 people have been killed. And that was the preliminary information that NBC's Jonathan Dienst got directly from the Pittsburgh Police Department when he phoned in just a short while ago with that. The complication of clearing a place like this, there are 3 different congregations that hold their service. There are 3 different areas of this building in the Tree of Life Synagogue that are used on a Sabbath morning, on any given Sabbath morning. You add for the fact that we're hearing that there was a special gathering for a bris ceremony this morning. That may be why the normal 9:45 service, reportedly according to the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, says there's, maybe 20 to 30 people typically at this early hour on the Sabbath morning. They no doubt have later Sabbath morning services. That's why they believe there were as many as 60 to 100 people inside, just complicating this matter. Whether that information was known to the shooter is purely speculative. Don't know if that gave it more reason to be a target or if it was just a matter of hate as he was shouting anti-Jewish sentiments while firing off whether it was an AR-style weapon or a couple of handguns. I'm joined right now here in the studio by MSNBC security expert Sean Henry. He is Assistant Director, formerly of the FBI, an Executive Assistant Director. So when you look at this and what we know thus far, Sean, and the fact that we have something which appears to be a hate crime, talk about how that potentially differentiates from just a typical shooting out of anger or whatnot.
Well, when you've got somebody who's allowed something to fester over a long period of time, if they've got specific hatred towards a particular group, in this case appears to be anti-Semitic, of course, we're not sure how long that they've been planning something like this. We've got long gun involved, an AR-15, a weapon that can do catastrophic damage in a very short period of time. As we see here, lots of casualties in a relatively short period of time. Police officers who are injured. I know we've been talking, I've been listening to Jim and Clint talking about this, that there may have been a very quick response by police, although I've seen just in the last couple of years houses of worship that actually have off-duty police officers working in the temple or in the church, even sometimes marked units outside because of some of this rhetoric.
And these are also sometimes, Sean, I know about communities that have tried to train their own congregants to literally stay in the lobby, take turns, have their either Saturday or a Sunday service, and they've been trained, they own guns, they're willing to use them should somebody come through the door. So it's even extended beyond that kind of preparation or the tenor of a religious service in this country on any given weekend morning that extends beyond just having police hired to come and take care. I mean, what does that say?
Yeah. We see in schools now these active shooter training for school children. Run, hide, fight, shelter in place. How do you secure the door of your classroom? And I've seen that happen in the workplace where there's that type of training.
Sure.
And then into congregations where we've seen these types of violent attacks against innocent civilians that people Unfortunately, police officers aren't able to respond as quickly as they can in these situations, and people have to take care of themselves. So they're training in advance to prepare themselves, whether it be with firearms or in the event they've got to extricate themselves to prepare and to get themselves to safety.
Yeah. I want to bring in Malcolm Nance to the conversation. Malcolm, let's just look at the tenor of what's happened in this country, where the eyes of pretty much everybody have been on these package bombs that have gone to 14 different places, 12 different individuals across this country, the result of the man in Florida who was arrested yesterday and charged with the crime. Speak to that and the extent to which you think that feeds into what we're seeing here this morning. I mean, can one separate one incident from another, or is this all related?
Yeah, you can separate one incident from another, but as you said, there's a tenor that's going across the nation. And, you know, this sort of reminds me of the time that you know, in the 1980s during the Great Militia Rising, where, you know, even though I was working international terrorism, most of the incidents that were occurring in and around the United States were right-wing extremist terrorist groups, you know, originating out of Idaho and other places, who were carrying out acts that were not being seen by the media as integrated, but which were. There was actually an entire movement of groups that were, you know, that had common ideology. Attacking a Jewish synagogue on a Saturday morning, a week after or days after there had been a mail bombing campaign to go out against liberals, you know, according to people on one side of the political spectrum, you know, it just tells me that media campaign, the intensity of that guy's, you know, the bombing campaigns, you know, media, had worked into the mind of this individual, and that he was going to extend this period of terror, this period of intimidation, by carrying out his own act. Mm-hmm. And we see this oftentimes, that one incident will exacerbate another person who may feel that he is also a foot soldier in a crusade, and that it is his job to sustain the effort, so to speak.
Yep.
You know, this is dangerous. This could lead to other incidents. And I'm surprised, actually I'm sort of not surprised, that these shooters who were here in the United States, they're not Islamic radical terrorists from overseas who die. Yeah. They surrender once they do this, so that they make their point, and can live to tell it in court.
That this shooter, who has yet to be officially identified, but that he did indeed surrender, and he was injured at the time. Let's go right now to NBC's Pete Williams. Pete, I understand you have an update on the situation?
Well, there doesn't seem to be much doubt here, as if there was any to start with, that this is a hate crime based on what we're told by authorities the suspect said. Now, we're not giving a name yet until we're absolutely certain of it, but we believe that the suspect is a 46-year-old man, and the number of fatalities is somewhere between 8 and 10, we're told. And we know that, according to authorities that have talked to our John Dienst from WNBC and producer Tom Winter, that the 12 people in all were shot. We know that 3 of those were law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And we're waiting for confirmation, but it appears that the number of fatalities is 8, 9, or 10. But we're waiting to get definitive word on that. The suspect is, we think, may be wounded, but is in custody. And now, of course, as you know, the authorities are going through the building just to make sure that no one else was involved. That's a standard procedure in something like this. And to make sure that there are no other victims. So it has 2 purposes for them to go through the building very, very carefully and very methodically. And that's what's happening right now.
Absolutely. But to your point, you're citing the statistics. And of course, we like to get all our facts and figures correct and have them corroborated by multiple sources before reporting them. But it speaks to the chaotic nature of a situation like this, that the numbers we initially got, they are certainly fluctuating. So we will wait to see officially the level of carnage here. To your point, Pete, they are still searching the synagogue. I had made the point that there were 3 different areas within the Tree of Life synagogue where they typically had Shabbat, Sabbath morning services. Right now, the police there are using a drone overhead. They're trying to assess any potential entry points on the roof, and apparently it is the 3rd floor of the synagogue right now that is being checked for a possible IED in a suspect package there. Now, this is according to police radio, so we don't know the length of time that the assailant had inside that synagogue before opening fire.
Right. So our understanding, and first of all, I would describe that just as a suspicious package at this point. That's something that they'll be checking for too. But our understanding about how this happened is that the gunman entered the synagogue, came out. That's when he apparently had his initial exchange of gunfire with the police, then went back in, and then finally came back out. So we don't know, of course, how long he was in there the first time or the second time, how long, whether he was carrying something else in addition to the weapons that he was carrying.
Correct. We're going to get a sense now of this synagogue from somebody who knows it well, somebody familiar to our viewers, NBC News analyst Howard Feynman. Howard, I'm sure this is a difficult time for you. I understand that you grew up attending the Tree of Life congregation, as part of the congregation attending that synagogue. Talk about the facility, maybe how it is laid out in addition to that community there in Squirrel Hill.
Okay, well, first let me say that I'm heartbroken.
I bet.
That my own thoughts go out to everybody I know in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, to the families in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood, which is one of the great and peaceful Jewish neighborhoods in America. And the Tree of Life is one of the major institutions in that community. As for the layout, there's an old central part of the synagogue. There's a very large sanctuary that they built later on, where I'm sure the services were. I'm guessing the services were this morning in the larger synagogue along the main avenue there. And there's a third part that's for the school and a social hall and so forth. It's an old congregation in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, people may not know, has a pretty extensive Jewish community. There are probably a dozen synagogues in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. This is one of the older ones, very much a center, one of the many centers of Jewish life in Pittsburgh. Squirrel Hill has a very bucolic name. It's actually one of the largest contiguous Jewish neighborhoods, I think, in the United States, certainly outside of New York. And it has a long and storied tradition. It's a place I never thought as a reporter I would be reporting on in this way. To me, on a personal level, it's a testament to both the historic dangers that Jews have faced, but also, I must say, without knowing anything else, the sort of horrible, dislocating and upsetting time we're living in the United States. Again, I don't want to overinterpret. I don't know anything about the alleged shooter. As Pete Williams said, it's almost certainly a hate crime given what this person was shouting. All I can tell you is if this kind of violence reaches the tranquil Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, it means that it's everywhere, not only in this country but around the world. And as I say, it's a remarkable area. It produced a lot of really great people like Jonas Salk and so forth. Very much oriented toward the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University, which are both right nearby there. Pittsburgh is now really a college town and a research town, is more than an industrial town, and Squirrel Hill is very much at the heart of that.
To your point about it being a hate crime, I've got to wonder about the horror of the congregants there inside that synagogue, as they may have heard the suspect shouting reportedly, "All these Jews need to die." It is something that he reiterated and stated it to police. So indeed, this would definitely put it in the category now of a hate crime. Howard, your experience there, granted you may not have attended Shabbat services there recently, but typically with a 9:45 a.m. service, 20 to 30 people in the building for a service around that time. But the fact that there was another celebration service, that being a bris, we are told, for an infant, would make the number swell to some degree. But that number, you've talked about the synagogue. It is an older synagogue. Does it have an intimate feel to it, or is it a larger sort of temple feel?
It's a larger institution where there's a great history and a great respect, and where I'm sure on high holidays and bar mitzvah and bat mitzvahs and other events like that, the place is, if not full, it has hundreds and hundreds of people in it. I don't know what was going on this morning. It doesn't sound like there was a bar mitzvah. There was a bris, which is another kind of ceremony, and a regular Saturday service. What I wanted to stress to you, based on my knowledge of my hometown, and I do keep in close touch and travel there a lot, this kind of thing at a place like this, even among sophisticated people who know what's going on in the world, has got to be a profound shock. Pittsburgh is the kind of city where the ethnicities are lined up neighborhood by neighborhood, where people generally have a fond respect for each other's ethnicity. It's a real ethnic checkerboard. But my experience of Pittsburgh, and I'm not being naive, I know the city, is generally that people are tolerant. People are very tolerant in the city, and loving in the city, and have tremendous, love for their town, for their city, that overreaches any one neighborhood. And there's a lot of pride throughout the city about Squirrel Hill, about its role in Jewish life, that everybody from around town takes part in terms of food, in terms of festivals, and so on. That this kind of thing can happen in a place like this is what I want to keep stressing.
Yeah.
It shows that in a peaceful, in its own way, kind of out-of-the-way place like this, something this massive and horrific can happen is just a cautionary tale to us all, no matter what our religious background, no matter what the color of our skin or anything. It's profoundly shocking, and I'm embarrassed to say that it takes something like this for me to see it fully and to be as fearful as I am.
Well, to your point, we are looking at some of the police vehicles on scene. There were reports by a local resident who was shouted at by SWAT and said, "Stay inside," peeking outside his window, seeing some 30 police cars on scene at 10:30 in the morning in this bucolic neighborhood on a sleepy Saturday morning. When we think about this, to your point, Howard, that you said if this can happen here in Squirrel Hill, it can happen just about anywhere. That is not being lost on the officers and officials within the NYPD. They are deploying teams to synagogues and Jewish locations throughout New York City. I imagine they are not the only law enforcement agency to be taking note of what's happening here and trying to make things safe for anybody who would wish to attend any services on this Sabbath morning.
I have to say I don't know all the history here by any means, but I can't off the top of my head, given the number of casualties that we have here even now confirmed, I can't think, maybe the archives can tell us, or the wires can tell us, whether there's been a more deadly shooting at an American synagogue. I'm trying to remember. And again, the level of this and the deadliness of it is just utterly shocking, utterly shocking, and out of character, I must say, out of character with a place like Pittsburgh. It's a big city, it's a cosmopolitan place, but I can't stress enough what a peaceful and wonderful neighborhood this is. Pittsburgh is an unusual city where there are tree-lined neighborhoods throughout the almost practically into downtown. It's a place that has become kind of popular. It's almost like a hip city at this point. People are moving because it's cheaper. The pace of life is slightly slower, but yet there are lots of amenities and lots of cultural institutions. Pittsburgh is as profoundly peaceful a place, at least in the last 120 years since the labor riots of the late 19th century that we have in America. And there's special efforts made to reach across lines in terms of race and ethnicity and so on. It can be tough. I mean, you talk to the black community in Pittsburgh, they have lots of concerns about policing in the city. I'm not saying that there isn't jostling among the races and the ethnicities, but that's not something that characterizes Pittsburgh. And that should be a cautionary tale to everybody around the country and the world.
Howard, very quickly, you said this was one of about a dozen synagogues in the area. Just quickly, so
I would say roughly in the Squirrel Hill area. I don't know the exact number today, but I would say it's close to that. And
Okay.
I'm sure the Pittsburgh Police and the Allegheny County Police are on that part of the case.
Howard Feynman, thank you so much for that. And
Thank
for
you.
all of you, welcome. I'm Alex Witt, live here at NBC World Headquarters in New York. It is high noon here on the East Coast, and if you are just joining us, we want to bring you up to date on the breaking news we are following. At least 8 to 10 people are dead. This in a shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. The suspect is believed to be a 46-year-old man. He is now in custody. The suspect was reportedly armed with an AR-15 style rifle as well as multiple handguns. Reportedly, a total of 12 people have been shot. That would include 3 police officers. The site of this heinous incident, the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. It is home to one of the largest synagogues in the area. The attack is believed to be a hate crime. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf has arrived on the scene. The president is also expected to speak this hour on this. He has already tweeted about this with his concerns. I'm joined right now by NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, what's the latest on this from your vantage point?
It apparently happened at about 10:30 when a man armed with what authorities say is an assault-style weapon, an AR-15 style weapon that can fire semi-automatic rounds, entered the synagogue, also potentially carrying a handgun, and opened fire. He was in there for a time, we don't know how long, came out, had his first engagement, we believe, with police officers who were responding, went back in, and subsequently came back out where he was arrested. We believe he may be wounded. He's a 46-year-old man, we think, from Pittsburgh. We're not giving his name until we're certain of the identity, and we don't know anything further about him. We haven't found any social media or anything to indicate a possible background here. But according to the authorities, he did make some anti-Semitic comments, so it would seem to be clearly a hate crime. We believe that 12 people in all were shot, presumably all by the gunman, although that is yet to be determined. 3 of those people were law enforcement. Their wounds vary in severity, and we're still waiting for clarification on the number of fatalities, but it is a large number. It's somewhere between 8 and 10, 8, 9, or 10. Now, anytime something happens like this in any major city where you have an attack on a defined target, the police in New York do what they usually do, and what they're saying now is that they are deploying their heavy weapons teams to houses of worship across the city of New York, even though there's no indication that this is anything other than a local event, but that's what they usually do in New York whenever there's any kind of a threat to a known target. So you can assume that they've done that, and they've said they've done so.
Understandably so. I know, Pete, that we did hear from the president via tweet. We know that he will, in all likelihood, make a statement within the hour or so. He does have 2 rallies today. As I read the tweet that the president sent out earlier, watching the events unfolding in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, law enforcement on the scene, people in Squirrel Hill area should remain sheltered. Looks like multiple fatalities. Beware of active shooter. God bless all. Of course, we know that he is factually correct indeed, because there have been some fatalities. Pete, the complication here in terms of closing down the actual site, we know there are at least 3 stories in this building. There were 3 different areas that were being used for worship on a Sabbath morning. They will have to continue for quite some time, because we're not sure that the suspect didn't do something else like plant an explosive device. That, of course, being the topic of conversation on everybody's minds throughout this entire week. So you expect it will take some time before the actual location of the Tree of Life Synagogue will be cleared?
Well, even if there were no reports of suspicious packages, and there are, and I've gotten no confirmation from the federal authorities I've talked to who are assisting the police there, no indication that there's been any confirmation of that, but that's a complicating factor here. Even without that, it would take some time to clear the building. And of course, what authorities are trying to do is check two things out. They want to make sure, and they never know whether anybody else might be involved, so they've got to check that out. And then they've also got to see if there are any other victims. And then you add to that apparently witnesses inside have said they've seen suspicious packages or the authorities have seen it. And so that has to be checked out, and that will delay things as well. If there's any concern that there's a hazardous device there, then they're going to clear out all the people who are clearing the building and get the bomb squad in or the right people to look at that. As we look at these pictures, we have to be careful to distinguish between what's live and what's tape playback, because we see pictures of people running inside as though they're responding to some kind of emergency. So it's a little tough to tell sometimes from these pictures what's live, like these pictures of people running in, what's live and what's tape playback. So I think we have to be a little careful to mark the tape as tape and not live picture, because the live picture is clearly what we're looking at here, where the situation does appear to be over in the sense that there's no more shooting, but now the clearing of the building is still the top priority.
Well, to your point, Pete, the picture that we are looking at right now, it is live, and we don't see anybody running quickly. It would seem that if they were inside that building, there were officials in there trying to clear it of any potential issues. That would be a very painstaking process and going on, you know, literally foot by foot throughout that building. May I ask you, in your role as our justice correspondent, if this is deemed to officially be denoted as a hate crime, how does that change the equation at all for the suspect who is in custody?
Well, it's an additional possible charge, but I mean, if there are fatalities, as there certainly are, then he's undoubtedly going to be charged with murder. And so a hate crime would potentially be a sentence enhancement. But, and I think the other possibility is it opens up the possibility of federal jurisdiction, since murder is not a federal crime, but there are federal hate crimes. So that raises the possibility that it could be a federal charge as well. Normally in these situations, the federal authorities would defer to the state and to the locals because it's their people who were the victims. So they have perhaps the greatest interest in seeing justice served. But it does raise, it's a double thing. It's a sentence enhancement and possibly raises the issue of federal jurisdiction, but that's way down the road.
Yeah. Pete, as we ask you to stay with us, I'm going to go now to Sean Henry, who's former executive at the FBI and an MSNBC analyst. So, Sean, we are just getting word, and I was showing this to you as Pete was talking, police sources said that the Tree of Life Synagogue has just now been considered cleared and secured. Let's look at this in its totality. This was about a 2-hour-long onslaught. When you look at the level of carnage here, talk about the efficacy with which it is likely that police got on that scene, did their job, considering there was a man with an AR-style weapon, handguns that may have left 8 to 10 people in his wake dead.
Well, we've got 3 police officers who've been shot, so clearly their engagement there. The suspect, it appears, may have been wounded and has surrendered, so the police being there was critical to having this mitigated quickly. You may have had many more people injured or killed had this assailant been able to run throughout the synagogue undeterred by the responding police officers. When you say that the facility is secured, it may be secured in terms of we've been able to determine there's no other suspects there. Perhaps there are no other devices there. But this will be an ongoing crime scene because there will be a very sensitive crime scene search looking at where rounds were shot, the trajectory of the bullets, et cetera, when victims were hit. There will be a very extensive review there in that particular case. Let me add to something that Pete said as well, that this will be looked at primarily by the local police. This will likely be a joint terrorism task force response. It appears to be FBI agents there on the scene. I couldn't tell quite by looking here, but certainly Pittsburgh Police Department is a major player in the Pittsburgh Joint Terrorism Task Force. if the FBI or federal authorities don't have actual jurisdiction, if it's determined that they're going to allow it to go to the locals, they will absolutely be providing assistance to their Pittsburgh police partners. When you've got police officers who've been killed, you've got people that have been killed in what may be a hate crime, the FBI will be providing those types of resources from a technical perspective, from an investigative perspective, providing enhanced resources and capabilities to ensure that that crime scene is secure, they've collected as much evidence as they can, and that they're providing continued intelligence for the ongoing investigation to determine what was the cause, what was the motive, who else may have been involved in the course of this particular incident or additional incidents that may have been planned as part of this.
When you talk about all this, I imagine the investigation is probably underway already into exactly who this person is. He's been in custody for a short period. Again, we had reports that he was injured and that he actually surrendered to police there. So that part of the investigation is underway. But the reaction, say, of the NYPD, now without any sort of I guess, claims or threats or anything against anything in New York City, yet they still feel the need to go out and offer some protection to different Jewish synagogues or places of congregation on this Sabbath day. That's probably not New York exclusive. You would think there were other cities probably doing the same thing, taking a page from this and wanting to keep their citizens safe.
I think that's right. In an abundance of caution, law enforcement are going to take proactive measures to ensure if there's a threat, something's occurred elsewhere, that there might be a copycat, that there might be some other threat. And again, just as a precautionary measure, not necessarily saying that there's a particular threat, but just to give citizens a sense of comfort. You've got people that are worshiping all over the country today on the Sabbath, that you'll have law enforcement that's responding and providing a level of comfort and security to those that are participating in services.
Sean, thank you for being here in the studio with me. Joining me right now, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and a fourth-generation congregant of the Tree of Life Synagogue. Joel, this must be very, very difficult for you to witness, as it was for our colleague Howard Feynman earlier, who grew up in that synagogue. Tell me about your thoughts today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks for covering this. And yes, I'm fourth-generation Pittsburgh, grew up with the synagogue is a deep part of my life. I was on the phone earlier with my parents who were there for Friday night services last night. It was a packed house. 3 synagogues actually share that space right now. And this morning there was a baby naming. I've had my 3 daughters named there in a similar Saturday morning Shabbat service of baby naming. And the shooter said all Jews must die. As he shot indiscriminately. And it's a place of peace and worship and of love and family. And it's despicable. And it's something that there just aren't enough words to describe.
Talk about that community, that neighborhood. It looks positively beautiful. Single-family homes. I'm told that it has a number of synagogues in the area. I mean, talk about what it's like there. It seems to be bucolic and lovely.
Squirrel Hill is one of the gems of urban America. It's a neighborhood that is thriving in the heart of the city of Pittsburgh. It has been a place for families to raise children, but it's also been a center for economic vitality of Pittsburgh, and where families during the steel industry, through the academic community, Carnegie Mellon University is right down the street. It's a multi-ethnic neighborhood. It is one that is, yes, very religiously diverse. In terms of the Jewish community, it's known nationally as one of the primary Jewish communities in the country. Squirrel Hill, as a neighborhood, has been long a leader of Jewish life and activity. The synagogues are diverse. There are Reform Jewish, Conservative Jewish, Orthodox Jewish, all different strains within that. There are synagogues there who are coexisting comfortably together. You can be there on a Saturday morning and see very religious Jews walking the neighborhood streets alongside secular Jews who may be going to play basketball at the Jewish Community Center, the JCC, which is a large facility right in the heart. And it's a really fantastic urban neighborhood.
People just choosing how they want to spend a beautiful Saturday morning met with this kind of crime. It is absolutely extraordinary. So these three different areas within the synagogue, you're familiar with it enough that is there one that is the general congregation area, and that there may be separate gatherings for different sort of religious focus? Is that what it's like? I mean, sometimes do they put children in one area, or can you explain that?
Sure. Well, typically in the larger synagogues in particular, there are multiple venues for prayer. So there may be a main sanctuary, which is the largest, but then there were also side sanctuaries that are smaller where typically you may have a youth service going on Shabbat. Excuse me. So, yeah.
It's tough,
It
isn't it?
brings back a lot. It brings back a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are multiple places to worship. And there are three synagogues that are sharing the space. So the place is just packed with life in all different corners. And I'm sure there are a lot of kids hanging out, not going to services, sitting in the stairwell. And then there are older families celebrating the baby naming. And when you have a life cycle event like a baby naming or a wedding or a bar mitzvah, you attract larger crowds than normal. Normally, a Shabbat service, when there's no life cycle event, will draw a crowd. But when there is a life cycle event, it becomes a magnet of activity, and there will be after the service likely an oneg, we call it, which is a lunch buffet. Yeah. Just a lot going on a Saturday morning.
Joel, I know this is a tough day for you. Thank you for phoning in, and we may get back to you. But let's go right now to WPXI's reporter David Johnson, who is on the scene, and take a listen to what he's reporting.
We almost surely know someone inside that building. There was, as I think Aaron Martin has confirmed, and I heard this from the rabbi, there was what's known as a bris, that is a ceremonial circumcision that was going on in there. So that would bring a few more people into the building. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm understanding from our photographer she's going to zoom in. So we're just getting reaction. There's a large crowd, not just media, but other residents who are kind of gathered around here, kind of waiting for word from us, and kind of word of mouth on what is the latest as we are waiting for an official word. And again, you just saw Governor Wolf and Senator Casey walk by. They are being briefed, and as we understand it, we're just a couple of minutes away from getting an official briefing, and we will have that for you live on Channel 11 when it does happen. But that's the latest right now here at the corner of Northumberland and Murray, only about maybe 3-4 blocks away from the synagogue in Squirrel Hill. Back to you.
All right, everybody, that was David Johnson of our affiliate WPXI giving a report for the local news audience there. I'm joined again by Sean Henry, who's here in studio with me. And you said you've been getting some text updates from officials. What are you hearing?
I have, that actually NYPD has already deployed marked units to synagogues throughout the city.
Marked units?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a statement.
So, again, kind of showing a sense of force, providing some confidence and security, comfort to those that are inside those facilities. You've got people that are reporting to House of Worship going in today. We listened to Howard and Joel just talking, their congregants in this particular synagogue, and how emotional it is for them. Just thinking about people who are gathering for these types of events, one of the most sacred places, in this horrific type of an attack by somebody. I want to add to something. I listened earlier to Malcolm and Jim Kavanaugh, and they talked about the most recent incidents this week with the mailings and this particular incident. And while certainly we've seen a lot of the rhetoric that has been somewhat insightful and this kind of tone around the country, it really is too early to connect these two incidents. So I don't think people should jump to these conclusions. They very well may be some type of a relation, maybe not. The investigators are going to follow the leads. They're going to follow the facts. This will be a very thorough investigation. And at the end of the next couple of days, they will have a very good sense, because they've got a subject in custody. They will be exploiting social media and devices like computers and telephones. They will come up with a lot of information to determine what the motive is. And we'll see if it's connected or not. But I think it's much too early to presume that that's the case.
But let's talk about the word connection, Sean, because yes, from a forensic standpoint, from an FBI, your standpoint, investigation, these two may not be connected in terms of actualities and forensics, or whether the two suspects knew each other, not that kind of thing. But just the tenor, the discourse, the divisiveness in this country right now. Is it fair to say that that has permeated the atmosphere? And that is something that raises alarm bells within the FBI, within local law enforcement, thus having to deploy marked cars, uniformed police officers to places of worship on a Sabbath morning.
Of course, when you get what may be considered by some to be a permissive environment where this is perhaps condoned, of course. We talked earlier this week when we were looking at the mail bombing campaign about copycats, people who might see what's occurring and they were on the edge. And what pushes them over the edge? People that are engaged in this type of activity, it doesn't just begin typically one day. They're a law-abiding citizen and the next day they're an active shooter or they're mailing bombs. That typically doesn't happen. This is typically a long process over many months or even years that takes place. There may be a defining moment that causes them to go from aspirational to operational. We're not really clear. What law enforcement officers will do in this case is a very thorough investigation. In addition to looking to see if there are other co-conspirators aligned specifically with this incident, they'll be looking to determine what the motivation is and what they can learn going forward.
I want to bring Clint Van Zandt back into the conversation and have Clint, you wear your hat as a former FBI profiler. I'm going to tell you that I have a name in front of me. I will not release this person's name. I can say that it is a male that is allegedly the suspect that is in custody. But when you look at the profile of somebody who would commit a crime like this, potentially a hate crime, Sean makes the point that these things don't usually just happen overnight, that these sentiments are fomenting for quite some time. Speak to that and how you look at that in the investigation.
Well, we've said for years, both for school shootings, violence in the workplace, and others, that a shooter, an individual, doesn't just snap. He or she has a period that builds up. And again, Sean is absolutely right. We've seen these individuals anywhere from just a matter of weeks to a year and a half or longer. The Columbine shooters, the two teenagers in Columbine in 1999 planned a year and a half before they carried that off. And we see others take that long too. But, you know, I'll also say that when you're planning it, you need some emotional initiator. Just like on a bomb, you need something to set that bomb off. In the human mind, you need something to set you off. I'm prepared, I have the guns, I have the ammunition, I know what my target might be, but why today? Why not yesterday? Why not next week? There is some emotional initiator, and many times that can be a recent event. It's the aha phenomena. Aha, now I know what to do. Now I know when to carry it out. As you and I talked earlier, there have been over 275 mass shootings in the United States, 4 or more people shot in the same shooting. So there are plenty of examples, unfortunately, in this country of an individual, if he or she wants to act out and use a weapon as a form of conflict resolution, those examples are there. All they need to do is the initiator, something in their brain that says, today's the day, go forward and murder, and that's what happened this morning.
And in terms of those weapons, let's bring in Jim Kavanaugh to the conversation again. Jim, we are told that there was an AR-style weapon. I believe you have identified it as a long gun, using that vernacular. Also, 2 handguns were found on the suspect, who, I just want to reiterate, he surrendered and he was allegedly injured. Actually, Jim, hold that thought one moment. We're going to get back in with WPXI's David Johnson, who's on the scene live. Let's take a listen to what he's reporting.
Been waiting to hear from police. We heard from them, what was it, about maybe 45 minutes ago, and I'm looking back there and seeing if there's any movement. So nothing right now, and I'm not sure who these gentlemen are, but when we have that, we'll bring it to you right away, right here on Channel 11 News. Obviously, when we get the word from police, what exactly has happened, what they know about the shooter. No, they're not. Anyway, that this is moments away. Come on through. That's all right. It's a hectic scene here, obviously. So when if you want to come through, come on through. Go through. No problem. We just feel like it's seconds away, and obviously we want to get the official word, the very latest for you, and when we get that, we're going to bring it to you live. So stay with us right here on Channel 11. There's obviously a lot of great concern, and when we hear numbers like 8 dead, it is just unbelievable and terrifying and shocking, but we want to get all those details from police, from them officially. So I'll send it back to you right now with that.
Thank you, David. And
so we appreciate WPXI's David Johnson there, and he said reports of 8 dead. We've also heard that number may go up to as many as 10. David very wisely waiting to get official confirmation, which he expects at any time. We're, of course, going to be watching that camera for you as well. Back to you, Jim Kavanaugh, and the weapons that were used in this attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. How easy is it to get a long gun, an AR-style weapon? Is there any sort of, what kind of hoops does anybody have to go through to get a weapon like that?
If you're not a prohibited person, a convicted felon, or a fugitive from justice or anything, you can just buy it. You can buy it at the store.
Buy it and take it home. Buy it on scene and take it right away.
And buy it from a private citizen. They're very easy to acquire. Alex, if I could, I would like to add on to the conversation you had with Clint and Sean, because I spent my whole life working on these kind of guys, and I wanted to bookend your discussion with, Clint talking about it's usually a slow roll to the radicalization and the hate crime, and I would just bookend you 2 cases. Dylan Roof, who radicalized in the white hate movement by himself on the web and killed everybody at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, African Americans. And Frazier Glenn Miller. This was a guy we knew about for years in law enforcement. He killed 3 people at a Jewish community center in 2014, and he was 73 years old. Now, Dylan Roof was in his 20s. Frazier Glenn Miller was 73 years old, and he had spent his whole life in the Ku Klux Klan. He started the White Patriot Party, and he was convicted on firearms violations in the 80s and in a plot to kill Morris Dees at the Southern Poverty Law Center, who Morris is a friend of mine, and I'm glad he's still working hard against these guys. But Miller wanted to kill Morris Dees in the 80s, and in 2014, he shot up a Jewish community center and a Jewish retirement center in Kansas City, Overland Park, Kansas, and he killed 3 people. So, now you got a guy here who's 46 years old, anti-Semitic, goes in with the 3 guns. So just like Sean and Clint are talking, these are we've seen some guys that it takes them a lot of years before they really decide that the talk is not enough for me. The cross burnings are not enough for me. The Stormfront website is not enough for me. I've got to go do something. I've got to act. Their hate just boils out of them. And unfortunately, and Clint and Sean and a lot of us old agents and cops, we came on really just right post-60s into law enforcement. When we came on, it was just the smoke wasn't out of the air from these bombings in the civil rights movement and the killings and the Klan. And when I came on, we were all working heavily on the Klan and the Nazis. The FBI was, ATF was, these guys always had guns and bombs and making attacks, and it was a very busy, our whole life spent working on these people. And they kind of got tamped down in the 70s. The witnesses were on our side. Everybody was on our side. And really, I've never seen this feeling like it is today. The talk that you see in mainstream areas is anti-Semitic talk that it's just below the edge of some of this stuff. You know, the code words that are used, you know, international bankers is what these white hate guys always talk about, the Rothschilds, and all this false Jewish conspiracy that drives this anti-Semitism. And you see that talk getting out in the mainstream with just little caveats to it, like globalism or, you know, bankers over here, and it kind of morphs back and forth. It's too close to normal talk. I've never seen it this close. Before it was condemned, and now it's just permeates like nothing we've ever seen. I mean, this is the closest time I've seen to that time in the post-'60s, in the civil rights era. It's just, it feels like it's come back again. With all these hate crime attacks in the last few years, and this sort of crackpot conspiracy theories that take hold. I mean, these things take hold in otherwise normal people. I mean, can you imagine people believing? And I've had people tell me this, you know, on the street, that they think Hillary Clinton murdered people. They think that there's a pedophile ring beneath a pizza parlor. I mean, this stuff is so crackpot, yet people get fed a steady drip of this from certain media, and it takes hold in their brain, and you can't convince them it's not so. They believe it's so. And so that's a danger we are in America, the way that talk has reached that level. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we're going to find this guy has been a real hater.
It is an extraordinary thing, Jim, when you have to compare these days with those of the civil rights, which were very, very difficult times that this country survived, but thinking that they may even worse today. Jim Kavanaugh, thank you for that. For all of you, you've been watching an NBC special report on the deadly shooting at the synagogue there in Pittsburgh. I'm Alex Witt. We're going to stay tuned to all of this. We do expect the president to potentially make a statement, and we will give you that coverage on MSNBC.
Back to the corner. Back to the corner. Yeah, I think he's here.
Are these our batteries?
Yes. We're getting pushed back. Rabbi Chuck, could we do a live interview with you on Facebook?
Thank you. You want to go here? Thank you. Can I go over here? Yeah, go right here. Right, Lori, I'm going to put these down here, okay?
Yep.
Right.
Here, I'll put them in my pocket.
Okay.
Well,
no, cars can. No.
Darren, hello. Okay. Hey. Looking okay now. There it is.
Togneri is for police folks.
The guy's gonna come over. So
I don't know if it'll be Togneri or someone from state.
It feels like it's tight on my side.
I don't know if it's county. If it's county, it's hanging. That's why you're not getting that.
Bought a copy of the trip.
Well, you'd have to drive out to Greensburg, so I don't know if it's worth it.
Okay, so it's some kind of hardware.
I explained it to them before we got close.
Yes,
So
yeah,
if it happened, they were like, oh, it's a no. But anyways, I walked like down to beach.
Do we have HDMI cable?
And then all the way up to
I'd like parked right over there. Yeah, I've never actually got this to work. It's going to be raining and I got to stand out here. Yeah, we only have a short. Yeah, we have a short one. So I can do
Togneri. Yeah, that's for the city. County is aiming down.
But right now it's looking good as long as we don't move around too much.
Oh, man.
All right.
I walked past that.
T-O-G-N-E-R-I.
It was just a bunch of
It's T-O-G. Tog.
Yeah, we can try to. Yeah, we'll try this too.
I was going to text Sterling, tell him to do it.
Yeah, I know.
He's coming?
He's the public information officer for the city.
For police?
Yeah. Well, I need to have a big thing where I just send back the camera and
Former
yeah, is there anyone else? Yeah, oh, I see what you're saying. No, yeah. It's just me.
Yeah, okay. He gave the first statement. I don't know who's going to give this. I'm guessing it's above his pay grade.
Okay, all right, yeah, thank you for bringing it to me. Okay, I got the net desk calling me again. All right. Thanks. Hey, it's Aaron. Hey, just FYI, I'm trying to, Michelle was on the phone with me earlier. Yeah, and as far as where the SAT truck needs to be, can I give you that info?
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Jose Diaz-Balart.
Good day. We are following a developing story in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A mass shooting in that city. We see President Trump.
Following very closely the events of Squirrel Hill. I'll be speaking, making a statement at the Farmers of America. You see what we're doing. The Future Farmers, they have the big conference, and we'll be going there. I guess some of you will be going with me, and we'll be making a major statement. It's a terrible, terrible thing, what's going on with hate in our country, frankly, and all over the world. And something has to be done. Something has to be done. But it looks like the results are coming in, and they're far more devastating than anybody originally thought in the morning. In the morning, they thought that it was a shooter, but they had the shooter, or they soon would. But the results are very devastating. You're seeing the numbers come in. So we'll be speaking to you at the conference, the Future Farmers of America conference, and it's just a shame to watch this and to see this for so many years. So much of it is absolutely a shame. Do you have any questions?
Mr. President, do you think you need to revisit gun laws earlier this year?
You talk up, please.
Gun laws, Mr. President.
Well, again, this has little to do with it. If you take a look, if they had protection inside, the results would have been far better. This is a dispute that will always exist, I suspect. But if they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation. They didn't. And he was able to do things that, unfortunately, he shouldn't have been able to do. I hear the police were outstanding. I heard the police did an incredible job. And as you know, numerous police were badly injured. But again, law enforcement did a fantastic job. But we're going to have a very complete statement for you. With the results are coming in of what took place, how it took place. Again, law enforcement was outstanding, as always. I mean, as usual and as always, law enforcement was really outstanding. They stepped up to the plate. But Pittsburgh, great community, incredible people. I spoke with the governor. I spoke to the mayor. And to see this happening again and again and again is just a shame.
Mr. President, do you think there's anything you can do, because it happens again and again, to end this kind of violence?
Well, it's a violence that's, you look at the violence all over the world. I mean, the world has violence. The world is a violent world. And you think when you're over it, it just sort of goes away, but then it comes back in the form of a madman, a wacko. I think one thing we should do is we should stiffen up our laws in terms of the death penalty. When people do this, they should get the death penalty, and they shouldn't have to wait years and years. Now the lawyers will get involved, and everybody's going to get involved, and we'll be 10 years down the line. And I think they should stiffen up laws, and I think they should very much bring the death penalty into vogue. Anybody that does a thing like this to innocent people that are in temple or in church, we had so many incidents with churches, they should they should really suffer the ultimate price. They should pay the ultimate price. I felt that way for a long time. Some people disagree with me. I can't imagine why, but this has to stop. So we're going to have a statement at our stop with the young farmers.
Mr. President, towards the beginning of your presidency, you met with the NRA. You said maybe you were the president who could help solve this. Do you see that now as a possibility?
It's a case where, and again, nobody knows exactly what took place yet. It's too soon. But this is a case where if they had an armed guard inside, they might have been able to stop him immediately. So this would be a case for if there was an armed guard inside the temple, they would have been able to stop him. Maybe there would have been nobody killed except for him, frankly. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation. And when you look at it, we can look at it two ways. But again, if they had somebody to protect people. Now, isn't it a shame that you even have to speak that way? Isn't it a shame that we even have to think of that inside of a temple or inside of a church? But certainly the results might have been far better.
That's what I'd like to follow up with you on. Do you think that all churches and synagogues should have armed guards?
I hate to think of it that way. I will say that. I hate to think of it that way. So we'll see you with the future farmers.
Is that what you're suggesting?
No, it's certainly an option. I mean, in this world, this is a world with a lot of problems, and it has been a world with a lot of problems for many years, many, many years. And you could say, frankly, for many centuries. I mean, you look at what goes on. But certainly you want protection, and they didn't have any protection. They had a maniac walk in, and they didn't have any protection, and that is just so sad to see. So sad to see. The results could have been much better. It is a very, it's a very difficult thing for me to stand as president and to watch any of this go. You know, before I ran for office, that I'd watch instances like this with churches and other things. I'd say, what a shame, what a shame. But it's even tougher when you're the President of the United States and you have to watch this kind of a thing happen. It is so sad to see. So we'll see you at the with the young farmers. A lot of them are out there.
Do you think there's anything you can do with the NRA? Earlier this year you said you could
We're always talking. We're always talking to them.
President Trump on his way to Indianapolis, leaving from Joint Base Andrews, where he spoke about this mass murder that occurred this morning at a synagogue. Police say at least a dozen people were shot. At least 8 of them were killed. 3 of those shot were apparently law enforcement officers. Police say the suspect has surrendered. He is identified as 46-year-old Rob Bowers of Pittsburgh. And we go now to our justice correspondent, Pete Williams, with the very latest. Pete.
Well, apparently this is clearly a hate crime. He made anti-Semitic comments about killing Jews as he came out of the synagogue, according to eyewitnesses and law enforcement. His social media is rife with anti-Semitic comments and comments saying that he needed to act before a Jewish organization brought in refugees. According to law enforcement, the number of dead is somewhere between 8 and 10. And apparently what happened is he entered the synagogue at about 10:30 this morning, armed with what police describe as an assault-type weapon, an AR-15 semi-automatic type rifle, and a handgun possibly. Opened fire, came out, exchanged gunfire with police, and then went back in and ultimately came back out and was arrested and possibly wounded when he was arrested. The president made mention a moment ago of the death penalty. Pennsylvania is a state with the death penalty, although the last execution there was something like 20 years ago, Jose.
Pete, so many questions still unanswered. He is being interrogated by police at this hour.
Yes, that's my understanding. I don't believe that he has been taken to the hospital. If he was injured, I am not certain about exactly where he is right now.
And Pete, I mean, this happened during Sabbath, and the president again saying that if there were armed guards inside, things would be different. It's just not common policy in places of worship for there to be an armed guard.
Well, sadly, some churches do have armed guards, but certainly most houses of worship in the United States do not.
Pete Williams, thank you very much. So many questions still to be answered. This tragedy occurring this morning in Pittsburgh, as Pete Williams says, 8 could be as high as 10, maybe more. But right now, officials have told us that at least eight people have lost their lives this morning in this horrible massacre this morning in a Pittsburgh synagogue, Tree of Life congregation. We'll be back on the air this afternoon with major developments and continuing coverage on MSNBC and NBCNews.com, and a complete wrap-up tonight on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Jose Diaz-Balart reporting in New York.
Again, we haven't heard anything officially, so we shouldn't be held accountable for what we're
They were reporting it like it was. I was listening to what's the radio station? KK, right? All right.
listen to WS.
Yeah. I was listening to it on the way over, and they were reporting it like it was reported. They said police officials are saying, sneaky pricks. They're listening to the scanner. That's shady. That's bad. That's bad.
Fortes. No con. Forgot it today.
One woman, she's actually right in the corner to the left of me, and she said she almost had to hear the gun ripples. She did see police response, and she was just shocked. Her words that this was happening because she was reporting this stuff right now. We also talked to the president of the synagogue, who came up here, Mike Clark, giving his side of this happening. Just expressing B. Did you know there were multiple services? And after talking,
They're 125. You can go. I'll talk to Shane. When you get to. Hey, what's up?
That there's not anything active, that nobody else is still in the face of danger at this point. How about the local citizens? You can about imagine, Aaron, and you being a community resident yourself, you said you weren't very far away. I mean, what does this do to shake the fears of people on a beautiful Saturday morning? They've got to be in shock right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, this is shaken just about the entire community. I mean, I can even say, just speaking personally, it's just unnerving seeing the community like this, just because this is, Squirrel Hill is a very, very nice community, very quiet community, very large Jewish population. So Saturday mornings, you're seeing a lot of people who are walking to services at synagogue and things of that nature. So it's a very, this whole area is very active normally on a Saturday morning where a lot of people are out. And just to see something like this, speaking to residents, they say, you always, in the back of your mind, fear something like this could happen, but you never imagine it could happen in your own place of worship. And that's what they're dealing with right now. And it's just, it's just it's a surreal scene. I don't know any other way to put it.
It is extraordinary, that statement that you said about people see these things happening and you can never imagine it happens in their own backyards, and yet it repeats itself over and over again. Over 200 mass shootings in this country, which is categorized as anyone more than 4 people having been shot, which is just a tragic number in itself. Of course, the numbers today will be adding to that. May I ask you, Aaron, the suspect who's been identified as 46-year-old Rob Bowers, are you hearing anything about him? Very quickly before we go to your colleague, David Johnson.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything directly about it. I did just briefly ask the former pastor, or excuse me, the former rabbi who used to be over at the synagogue and have a congregation there. He said he hadn't heard that name before.
Okay.
So, we just heard it within the last couple of minutes, so we're working to find out more about it now.
Okay. Aaron Martin, thank you so much from that. Now to your colleague, David Johnson with WPXI. Let's listen to his reporting.
And I also asked a former past president of the congregation, I think we interviewed earlier as well. He had not heard this name. And sometimes, when you're in a position like a rabbi or a congregant who is in a position of authority, and you see these postings and you hear sometimes the rantings of people, quite probably like this, you might remember a name if it pops up over and over. But again, as I've been asking people, they have not heard this name, the suspect's name. I did want to check that, so that's one of the things I wanted to bring you. And I'm just checking behind me here, and so far, no movement. We were told many minutes ago that there would be an update on what has happened, how many people have been hurt, how many fatalities, how the injured are doing, how this all went down, and possibly more information about the suspect. We are still waiting for that. The media is gathered here. A number of people who are from the area are concerned. We have so many people just from the neighborhood, and Peggy, you've been talking about this. It's quite likely they know people inside. I believe I will know somebody inside. So there's a great air of anticipation right here, right now at the corner of Murray and Northumberland and Squirrel Hill, just a few blocks away, by the way, basically in that direction where the synagogue is. I'll send it back to you.
And David, before you go, Catherine and Joe asked me, and I'll ask you the same question. Can you remember anything like this? I mean, I guess I think of Richard Baumhammer's, who was it, Rodney Taylor. Do you remember a story like this in Pittsburgh?
No, you have to go back to those 2 incidents. I think they happened in that one year, around the year 2000, where we have a mass shooting in Pittsburgh, and then the shocking nature of this on a Saturday morning, on a Sabbath day for the Jewish community, Shabbat, where there was a ceremonial service going on in there. We understand a bris, that is a ceremonial circumcision of an 8-day-old boy. So there were people gathered in there. But Peggy, to answer your question, especially in the city of Pittsburgh, I cannot remember something like this, and it's a terrifying thing for people. As I look at them now in their faces, for them to hear about this and to realize it happened across the street, around the corner from them, in their own community that, Peggy, you've been describing as one of the great neighborhoods in this area. People love to come here. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place. To have this happen here is just an utter shock.
Yeah, and David, tell us more about your Squirrel Hill. This is your neighborhood. You live here. You raised your boys here. Tell us about that neighborhood and how shocking something like this is. It's just something you would never expect.
I can't even describe it. I walk past that synagogue. I drive literally every day. I drive past that synagogue. I've walked past it. I've ridden my bike past it. The Children's Institute is right across the street. That's the corner of Wilkins and Shady, one of the major intersections in Squirrel Hill. I love this neighborhood. It's a beautiful neighborhood. It's a great mix of people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, others. So many people who have moved in here. You have the influence of University of Pittsburgh and CMU. I'm just checking to see if anybody's coming behind me. The movie theaters, the restaurants, the stores, stores, the houses, the feeling of a real neighborhood. We have block parties here where we close off the streets. We just had one on my street, which is only a few blocks away. I understand that the Public Safety Director, Wendell Histrick, is coming right out to speak with us, so we're going to get an update. But Peggy, back to your question, it's just when I moved here in 1985, I knew, and I actually lived in another neighborhood at the time, I knew I wanted to be in Squirrel Hill. This is the place I wanted to be. I wanted my children to go to school here. They did. They went to high school not far from here, Alderdice. So it is a place, like so many around the country, that they just don't think this can happen here. That's what we think in Squirrel Hill.
Okay. David, yeah, I'm going to let you get ready for the next leg.
All right, everybody, that's what we are going to do as well. We are going to wait to get the official word there from the public safety officer, who should be coming to a microphone shortly to give us the details, the facts and figures that we are always straining to get in these chaotic situations. But Andy Card joining me once again, a former Bush chief of staff. Andy, I want to get back to something that the president said, and I know you were listening as he was about to board Air Force One bound for a rally. He talked about the hate in our country, the hate in the world, and how despicable it is. But he suggested that were there to have been somebody with protection, as he described it, inside of that religious house, that perhaps that would have mitigated the carnage that we've seen, that perhaps the only person who would have been injured, if not killed, would have been the shooter himself. It is a thought that not only is a thought, but has been put into practice by many congregations around this country of various faiths, where they feel the need to either bring in police protection, hire off-duty police officers, and or, sir, train their own congregants to take shifts, to operate one various Sunday or Sabbath and be out in a lobby area to protect those that are inside just worshiping. I'd just like you to speak to that and to the difficulty that it presents just processing the need for this.
Yeah, it's certainly not a world that I want to have become a reality. I think it would be very, very strange if I were to go to my wife's church and there would be an armed guard at the door. And it's not what we're used to. It's not what we should have. I'm not sure it's the right solution. But look, everything should be on the table. We should talk about everything. It should be situational. You know, a situation in Peterborough, New Hampshire would be very different than a situation in New York City. Or I don't understand. Squirrel Hill is a community I don't know well, but I've been there a couple of times, and it is not a place that I would have thought something like this could have happened, but it happened there. I just don't know the right answer. I do think the rhetoric that is used by most of our elected leadership should be very careful in how they use it. And, you know, I don't like insightful language. I don't like insightful actions that would cause people to take the wrong step. I'm not sure it's intentional when the rhetoric is offered, but some people are listening and they say, I'm going to react in some negative way that would be harmful. Mm-hmm. So I do want people to be careful with the rhetoric they use, especially our elected officials, and not just the president, but others as well, on both sides of the political spectrum in both parties. It's important for us to have language today that is respectful, that causes people to participate in our democracy in a good, clean way. I want people to come and vote. I want people to have the courage to run for office. I want people to be respectful of people who serve in government, even though they may disagree with some of the policies that they articulate. That's what America is about. So I want a calming voice to lead our country, and I'm hoping the president's voice will be one of those calming voices. But it should be an echo on both sides of the aisle, on the political spectrum. It should all be talking about the need for us to value life, to value respect, value dialogue, and value the reality of a democracy that can talk about things without being angry.
Well said, Andy Card. My last question to you, sir, as we listen to the president answering a few questions before boarding Air Force One, would you have advised him to either make a more, I guess, definitive statement on his thoughts, or would you have suggested that he wade into these different areas rather freewheeling as the reporters were asking him questions? How would you advise the president to handle things this morning?
Well, I think offer calming language, language of concern, language of sincere sympathy and empathy for the challenges that a community is going to have. Think of this community in Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, and what they're going through. Think of the families. Think of the people who were inside the synagogue that witnessed this. Think of the victims and their families. That's the empathy that I would like to see. I thought the question from a reporter talking about gun control was not very appropriate at this time. That's not the time to have that debate, and certainly you wouldn't be able to solve that problem overnight anyway. So this is a time for reflection, for telling people that we'll stand together and let's show a little bit more love and compassion and try to help everybody out.
Andy Card, again, well said, sir. Thank you very much for weighing in. We do appreciate your insights. Sean Henry, once again to you. So you've spent over a couple of hours here sitting with me as we've been breaking down this story. And Sean, you've gotten these nuggets of information. Now, how does social media play into all this? And I will once again say the suspect's name because it is now out there, 46-year-old Rob Bowers. He's of North Versailles, Pennsylvania. It is a suburb there of Pittsburgh. What happens next in the investigation?
You know, law enforcement officers, the PD in Pittsburgh, as well as the FBI and others, are going to be looking for the motivation here. What was the cause of this? What was the impetus? What did we know? Were there signs? Are there any indicators that there might be something coming going forward with either he had planned or through other co-conspirators? I took a look at the alleged shooter, Robert Bowers' social media. It appears to be his social media. It's now been taken down by Twitter, but there were some significant anti-Semitic rants there. We heard Pete
Did you know how long it went back? Could you tell?
It appears to have gone back just a couple of months, but one as recently as the last couple of days. He'd been talking about this group HIAS, a Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, which is apparently a Jewish refugee organization. And he talked about the invaders and that we can't make America great again as long as we have this infestation, this Jewish infestation. Interestingly, he actually has made some anti-Trump rants. Again, it appears that this is his social media account. It's now been taken down, but saying that Trump is a globalist and not a nationalist, not a nationalist. He's anti-Trump, and that he actually voted against Trump or didn't vote for Trump. It appears that, again, there's a lot of moving parts here, not really clear, but what I've seen that's been taken down, it certainly appears to be the alleged shooter's account.
Sean, thank you very much for those insights. If you can stay with us, that's great. I know you've got a lot of things on your agenda on this Saturday, but thank you very much thus far for the last couple of hours. And with a welcome to all of you, I'm Alex Witt here live at NBC World Headquarters in New York. It is 1 o'clock precisely here on the East Coast. And if you are just joining us now, we want to bring you up to date on this breaking news. Reports of at least 8 to 10 people dead in a shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. Again, the suspect, a 46-year-old man named Robert Bowers of Pennsylvania. He is now in custody. He entered that synagogue reportedly armed with an AR-15 style rifle as well as 2 handguns. There are reports of a total of 12 people having been shot. That would include 3 police officers who were very early arrivals on the scene. This all took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue. It is in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Sean Henry was just looking at the social media. Mr. Bowers has an anti-Semitic past, reportedly rife with anti-Semitic comments. It is also said that he shouted some anti-Semitic comments, whether upon capture or surrender or whether inside that synagogue remains unclear at this point. But let's listen to what the president said just a short while ago about the situation. Here he is.
It's a terrible, terrible thing what's going on with hate in our country, frankly, and all over the world. And something has to be done. Something has to be done. But it looks like the results are coming in, and they're far more devastating than anybody originally thought. If they had protection inside, the results would have been far better. This is a dispute that will always exist, I suspect. But if they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation.
There's the president again at Joint Base Andrews, about to board Air Force One. He is on his way to a campaign-style rally, the first of 2 today. Joining me right now on the phone, WNBC investigative reporter Jonathan Dienst, who has brought us a lot of information today. I understand you have some more to share with us. Jonathan, what do you have?
Basically, we can provide you with the update and summary of what law enforcement knows at this hour. They are learning a lot about the suspect, given his activity on the social media, including apparent anti-Semitic statements towards the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid Society, which is a New York City-based organization on Fifth Avenue, which helps bring in refugees at times from the Middle East to various communities. And he apparently had posted some hateful and concerning messages a couple of hours before this shooting incident. So that is something that has law enforcement here in the New York area now running around to follow up on those possible leads. As out in Pittsburgh, obviously the concern is for the officers and the worshipers who are in that synagogue, given the multiple fatalities, given the weapon that was used, the AR-15, and this clearly appears to be a hate crime directed toward congregants at that synagogue.
Jonathan, I got to tell you, my researcher was right behind you, and as you were speaking, I was getting a printout of the things that were listed there on the social media, some of which I would rather not say, but it certainly backs up that there was a tipping point a couple of hours ago, maybe 3 hours ago, it's hard to tell by the printout here, before obviously the incident took place. And basically, he alerted on social media. I will say the last three words there, "I'm going in." I mean, that is chilling.
There's that, and there's also, based on what Tom Winter and Pete Williams were reporting about some of the comments that he allegedly made to officers going in and out of the synagogue while he was shooting, making some anti-Semitic rants, apparently, that, clearly this is an apparent hate-filled attack targeting Jewish members, Jewish community. And as a result, that is where the investigation is leading at this time. Here in New York, the NYPD is responding to all synagogues as a precaution until they get a better sense of who this guy is, and is it just a lone actor? That is routine nowadays in major cities across the country. I'm sure you'll see the same thing in Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, until they have a solid feeling about this guy. But now they're going to have to go into his social media, his home, his computers, and to see where did he get these guns, and when did he decide to come up with this plot, this plan to target that synagogue.
Absolutely. Our colleague Sean Henry, formerly affiliated with the FBI, said they are already on that, and he's gotten some updates on that as well. Jonathan, may I ask you, I am not familiar with the website of HIAS. Do you know anything about this website that was cited by the shooter?
I am just learning myself about it. I can tell you what I've been briefed by on some law enforcement folks, and we'll be in touch with them, meaning the organization and the Anti-Defamation League, that is also getting regular updates. But what I can tell you is they have offices on Fifth Avenue here in Manhattan, near 37th Street. That's their headquarters. And they've explained to me they're like a charitable group. Think of the Catholic Charities, if you will. And they do various social service, public interest efforts, including helping the elderly, including apparently helping or getting involved with assisting refugees. At least that appears to be why this lone individual was angry at this synagogue today. We have reached out to the group. We are waiting to hear back. Obviously, it's going to take some time to hear back from them. But that is what's going on. I can tell you the NYPD and the FBI here in New York are now on it and heading to those locations to conduct interviews and also make sure that they're secure. So you're going to see not only an investigative presence at their offices, but a physical one as well, with heavily armed officers standing by as this investigation moves forward, certainly over the next hours.
Yes, NYPD having, as you well know, already launched police officers in marked cars to Jewish synagogues around the city of New York in a precautionary manner. Jonathan Deans, much appreciated. When you get some more information, we'll bring you back on. Thank you for that. Of course, we also heard from the president just a short time ago, and NBC White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell is joining us with the latest. Kelly, the president had a freewheeling conversation before boarding Air Force One. Let's talk about what all he said.
Well, this was the president's first opportunity to comment on the events unfolding in Pittsburgh, and he expressed sort of the horror everyone shares at how this has escalated as the number of believed deaths has gone up, and he reacted in those initial ways. He also talked about the fact that he will have a more fully prepared statement when he addresses the Future Farmers of America. It's not a campaign event. It is a White House event that will be in Indianapolis. He'll have a campaign rally later this evening in Illinois, but the president will also be before a large audience, and he'll have an opportunity when some of the facts are pulled together for him to be able to speak more broadly. He also said that he had spoken to the governor of Pennsylvania as well as the mayor of Pittsburgh, and the president was willing to take some questions, and this was an unplanned sort of impromptu moment. And among the questions asked of him related to his position on revisiting gun law after the number of these mass shootings and violence with weapons in our country. Here is part of that exchange with reporters outside Air Force One.
Mr. President, do you think you need to revisit gun laws earlier this year?
I talk up with
Gun laws, Mr. President.
Well, again, this has little to do with it. If you take a look, if they had protection inside, the results would have been far better. This is a dispute that will always exist, I suspect. But if they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation. They didn't. And he was able to do things that, unfortunately, he shouldn't have been able to do. I hear the police were outstanding. I heard the police did an incredible job. And as you know, numerous police were badly injured. But again, law enforcement did a fantastic job. But we're going to have a very complete statement for you. The results are coming in of what took place, how it took place. Again, law enforcement was outstanding.
So that is one of the core issues of debate, and usually it happens in the days after this incident. This is still unfolding. Families still haven't been notified. There's a lot here that is just developing. So it might be early for this conversation. But the president was asked this question, and often what we hear for those who believe that there should be strong access to weapons, that provides protection. We see this whether it's in schools or in places of worship or in hospitals or public buildings, this argument about whether it's better to have people, as the NRA would say, good guys with guns to stop bad guys with guns. That is certainly a hot political topic, and one for considerable debate, perhaps at a time other than this particular moment. But it is the world and the culture that we live in. The president also asked about this because he has said that he could be the type of president who could interact differently with the very powerful gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, and yet we have not seen that play out. The president saying he owes them effectively nothing politically, and that he could be the one who could change some of how things are handled with respect to weapons. We saw some of that coming out after the Parkland shooting, and yet there have not been substantial changes or any changes. There is a school safety commission that is continuing to do its work, and there is a pledge from this administration to stop bump stocks, that tool that was used in the Las Vegas mass shooting. But that's part of why the president was asked this question and part of why it's so much of our debate. Alex?
All right, Kelly O, thank you for keeping an eye on everything from the White House for us, and we will certainly get back with you. Let's go now to MSNBC national security analyst Ned Price. Ned, with a welcome to you. I just want to remind our viewers that we are waiting for a news conference, or a briefing, if you will, by the public safety official there on the scene. We are waiting to get the facts and figures and know specifically how many people were injured, how many people may have been killed, and any details they want to share with us about the suspect who is now in custody. But just as you take abreast of the situation, Ned, what comes to mind as you hear the situation from today, and you hear the talk of good guys with guns being put in places to keep out the bad guys with guns, those including churches, synagogues, schools? What are your thoughts, Ned?
Well, Alex, thanks. Really sad day. I think, look, both the event today and the events over the past week, I think have reminded us that extremism, and I think we should even call it terrorism in this case. The reports that this individual, as he was undertaking this rampage, said something to the effects of "all Jews must die." I think it underscores for us the necessity of understanding, of reminding ourselves, and especially reminding this administration, holding this administration accountable for their mistaken belief that terrorism comes in only one form. I think what we've seen over the past week in this country, in both of these series of attacks, is at least appears to be, from what we know now, and yes, we don't have all the answers yet, but at least appears to be domestic extremism, domestic terrorism coming to the fore. And we have now a president in the White House and administration supporting him who heretofore, at least, has portrayed terrorism as something that comes at us from overseas, that is the other is responsible for. And I think in both of these cases, as we learn more, I think we have to remain attuned to the fact that these could well be domestic terrorists among us who are using weapons available to them, in the case of mail bombs, in the case of an AR-15, to take on their own citizens, it looks like.
You know, Ned, do you think there is a connection to be made, however defined, between the tenor of things that we've all been witnessing this week and what we see today? And I will tell you, we're also keeping an eye, and it looks right now that we have officials coming to a podium. But do you think that connection can be made, that this is just in the atmosphere and it's inescapable at this time in our society?
Well, look, Alex, we know a lot more about the mail bombs just because it has transpired over the past week. And what is undeniable is the...
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Jose Diaz-Balart.
Good day. We go right to Pittsburgh on the very latest of this mass shooting.
I want to thank the first responders for doing what they have done to make us safe and to respond so quickly, so effectively to this tragedy. And I want to turn it over to Wendell.
Wendell Hesrick, City of Pittsburgh Public Safety Director. As the mayor mentioned, we've had a tragedy here today. The work of the first responders has probably prevented it from becoming much more tragedy than what it is. The scene is very bad inside. There are multiple fatalities. There are at least 6 injuries, to include 4 police officers. The police officers' injuries at this time are non-life-threatening. The other individuals are critical and serious in nature. They were taken to 3 of the level 1, level 2 trauma centers here in the city of Pittsburgh, that being Allegheny General, UPMC, and UPMC Presby and UPMC Mercy. At this time, I'd like to say that we have established a phone number with the assistance of the FBI for any questions from victims' families. That number is 412-432-4400. Once again, it's 412-432-4400. A Victims Assistance and Reunification Center has been set up at Chatham College on Chatham campus at Berry Hall at 106 Berry Street. We will have grief counselors there, as well as the Red Cross. Please allow about a half hour for the final plans on establishment of that center. However, there are individuals working to have it up and running as soon as possible. A further brief press conference will be held at the County Emergency Operations Center at 4 p.m. this afternoon, of which the elected officials and first responders will give you, as well as the FBI, will give you an update. At this time, this is being considered a federal violation, and the primary investigative agency will be the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I would like to personally thank the many first responders that had responded to this incident today, to include the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire, Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, the EMS, Allegheny County Police, and FBI, ATF, and numerous others that I can't even count how many first responders are here that are providing assistance. This will be a lengthy crime scene. We're asking people that don't need to be in this area, please stay away from it, so that both the investigators and first responders can do their job. I will emphasize at this time there appears to be no active threat to the community. This individual that we believe the subject that is responsible for this has been taken in custody. That's all I have.
Can you go over what happened?
I don't. That's going to be part of the investigation.
Can you do the numbers one more time for us?
For the injuries.
On the injuries, we believe 6 injuries, 4 of which are police officers. So it's a total of 6 injuries.
How many fatalities?
I will not discuss that yet until we are sure of the number.
Are children among the deceased?
I don't want to get into that at this point.
It's been reported that he screamed, "All Jews must die." Is that true or false?
There's a lot of information. I'd be very cautious on what you hear and what you don't hear at this time. Like I say, we have numerous investigators here. I would ask that if anyone has any information regarding the investigation, that they also call that 412-432-4400, and that will put you in contact with the FBI.
Wendell, can you tell us what the situation was in there? How many people about were inside?
I don't have that answer.
Was a service going on?
I do not want to give you. My understanding was there was a service occurring.
Has the security in place been lifted? Can people in Squirrel Hill leave their houses?
That is correct. However, we are setting up a very hard perimeter around the crime scene, and we ask individuals to stay away from that. So there will be a very secure presence around the crime scene just to protect the integrity of the investigation.
The person taken into custody, any weapons recovered off this person?
I don't want to get into that.
You believe he acted alone 100%?
I don't want to get into that. Right now, what we have is one subject in custody from the scene. Whether or not, as all these investigations, we have to look into every imaginable fact to find out if there is anyone else that's been involved in it.
What's the next step for you, sir?
I'm sorry?
Is there any evidence of a bomb?
There is not. Explosive ordnance disposal teams went through the scene, and there is no evidence of any IEDs or any further threat.
Wendell, for a moment there, you sounded very emotional. A hand was placed on your shoulder. Tell me how you feel right now.
It's a very horrific crime scene. It's one of the worst that I've seen, and I've been on some plane crashes. It's very bad. All right,
What's his identity?
I do not want to get into that. Like I say, there's a very active investigation going on right now.
Who's going to talk to us at 4 o'clock?
I'm sorry?
Who are we going to hear from at 4 o'clock?
You will hear from myself, the SAC, Special Agent in charge of the FBI, the U.S. Attorney, as well as the elected officials.
A lot of moving parts today. What's the next step here?
The next step is secure the crime scene. The FBI has both assets from both Western Pennsylvania and from D.C. en route here, so they will be running the investigation and the crime scene with the support of both the Allegheny County Police and the City of Pittsburgh Police.
Did the shooter actually attend the synagogue at any?
I have no idea. I'd like to also mention the state police. They've been instrumental in helping us out as well.
Just to be clear, is it 6 people or at least 6?
As far as the injuries, right now we're at 6 injuries.
Did you identify the gunman?
It's an active investigation. I mean, obviously we know who the gunman is, but I'm not going to bring that up now.
Why are the feds conducting the investigation?
As I mentioned before, this falls under a hate crime, being it's a Jewish synagogue, so it will be basically a federal investigation with the assistance of the locals, county, and state police.
Is the shooter among those injured?
The shooter was taken to the hospital, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much.
Officials describing a horrific scene this morning at a synagogue. At least 8 people were killed, at least 6 people injured, including 4 police officers. The suspect has been identified. I want to go to Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, with the very latest. Pete.
So not publicly identified, Jose, but we have heard from several law enforcement sources that the man that they've got in custody that was apparently wounded when he was arrested is a 46-year-old Pittsburgh man named Rob Bowers. Now, he has an extensive social media profile. We were told by witnesses at the scene, although the public safety director there shed some doubt on it, we were told by some law enforcement people and also some witnesses who had been at the scene of the synagogue that when he was taken into custody, he was shouting anti-Semitic comments, and his social media postings also expressed this over a long period of time, including one from early today, a couple of hours before the shooting, where he talks about a Jewish refugee organization called HIAS that he opposes and says they were bringing in people that would be bad for the country. I should point out, just because of the climate that we're in, that his social media comments seem to be anti just about everything. He also is critical of President Trump in his social media, saying the president is not a nationalist but a globalist, and that there will be no making the country great again as long as there is, and then he makes a very offensive anti-Semitic slur. So his comments seem to be hateful and directed in a lot of different ways, Jose.
And Pete, he apparently, officials are saying, entered the synagogue this morning with at least 2 different weapons, a long gun, a semi-automatic rifle, and a handgun.
Right. They say that he was carrying at least 2 firearms, one the AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle, which would account for his ability to fire a lot of shots. Some of the witnesses have said they heard what sounded to them like automatic weapons fire. Of course, those rifles can be fired very quickly. And also a handgun, maybe a long time knowing who was shot by what. And apparently, from what we understand, he entered the synagogue, did some of the shooting, came out, was encountered by police, driven back inside, and then came back out again. And that's, I'm not sure if he was wounded in the first encounter or the second one, but ultimately surrendered and was taken to the hospital.
And Pete, now the investigation now, and officials in Pittsburgh are saying, is now in the hands of the FBI.
Well, apparently that's been the initial determination that's been made, because it is a hate crime that does involve the federal jurisdiction. But, you know, how it's going to be prosecuted, whether it's going to be a local prosecution or a federal one, is to be determined. It could go either way, frankly, I think. And for all intents and purposes, the Pittsburgh police and the FBI and ATF and state police will all be working this investigation jointly.
Pete Williams, thank you very much. 6 injured, including 4 police officers. At least 8 people have lost their lives in this horrific scene, as that was described by officials in Pittsburgh. President Trump has reacted, describing what he called a terrible thing that's going on with hate in America. And we will, of course, have much more coverage on MSNBC as well as NBCNews.com. And, of course, the very latest tonight on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Jose Diaz-Balart reporting from New York. Thank you.
With you,
is it Shani?
For her, it's Shani.
So okay, Shani. So this is a female friend of yours. Do you know if she is being treated right now at a hospital?
My understanding is that she's okay. I would assume she's gone to the hospital, but I don't know that.
Okay. So you're obviously very familiar with the area. Your friend, is she a frequent congregant there at the Tree of Life Synagogue? Is this a typical routine on a Shabbat morning? Or I understand there was reportedly a bris celebration taking place. Might she have been attending that?
You know, it's either is quite possible. Not only is this synagogue the house to, you know, the Tree of Life congregation, but there have been other congregations that have rented space where they've maybe either just been starting as a congregation or they lost their space and were renting space for a period of time. So I know that over the years there have been more than one congregation on a typical Shabbat. And that, yes, I've heard that there was a bris. There was a bris going on. I'm the father of 2 boys.
Yeah.
I've grown up in Squirrel Hill my entire life, my wife as well. And when I think about the fact that there was a bris, and as a father, I had exactly the same ceremony for my 2 children, and that they're 2 young Jewish boys growing up in this community. This is devastating, and it's hard to process and hard to think about what we do to move on from here to make sure our children are safe, and how we explain this to them. And
Shani, I sympathize very much. It's hard during situations like this to even bring back tears. I'm a mother. We know that the bris ceremony is a baby naming ceremony, which means there was at least 1 infant there if that ceremony was indeed taking place. All I can say is in addition to my thanks for talking with us. Best of luck. God bless on this Sabbath for you, to you and your family and loved ones, and to your friend. We hope that she is okay and that she will recover. Shani Peled, thank you very much. And for all of you, we're just going to take a very short break here on MSNBC and stay on the very latest. I have a number of experts who will be joining me on the other side of a break. But if you are just joining us and you want to know what's been happening, we are getting word of at least 10 people having been shot, 8 to 10 killed. We did get officials saying that there were 6 injuries, 4 of whom were police officers with non-life-threatening injuries. But a tribute to the chaos of a situation like this. We do know that the numbers are not yet firm. We're going to get those for you as soon as we can. We'll bring you the very latest after a break. Stay with us here on MSNBC. As we are rounding the bottom of the hour, we want to fill you in on all the breaking news we've been covering for the past few hours for you. At least 8 to 10 people are dead after a shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. We now know the suspect. He is 46-year-old Robert Bowers. He is now in custody after surrendering to police. He was reportedly injured, and we heard that he is now in the hospital. He was carrying, according to police, an AR-15 rifle as well as 2 handguns when he opened fire. This at the Tree of Life Synagogue. This is a beautiful community there, the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. It is not too far from Carnegie Mellon University. Reports are a total of 12 people have been shot. We had some clarification that there were 6 injured, but this speaks to the chaotic nature of a situation like this. We are told among those injured, 4 police officers with non-life-threatening injuries. The other 2, presumably, though that number was not specified, are in critical condition. As for the suspect, Mr. Bowers, he is known to have made anti-Semitic comments on social media in the past, and as recently as this morning, with 3 chilling words being the last words on his social media, saying, "I'm going in." We did hear from the president both on Twitter twice, but he also approached the cameras at Andrews Joint Base and answered some questions about the shooting. He was heading on board Air Force One. This happened about an hour ago. And among the things the president said was calling for stronger consequences in cases like this one.
Anybody that does a thing like this to innocent people that are in temple or in church, we had so many incidents with churches, they should really suffer the ultimate price. They should pay the ultimate price. I felt that way for a long time. Some people disagree with me. I can't imagine why, but this has to stop.
The president referring to the death penalty there. Let's also take a listen to what a witness on the scene had to say about this morning.
I tried getting up there, and because I only live a block away from the synagogue, and the street was blocked off, loads of police cars, Shady Avenue, rifles drawn, and I just could not believe what I was witnessing.
Again, that witness trying to get to the location, living just 1 block away from the scene at the Tree of Life Synagogue. Joining me now, NBC News Justice Correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, you've brought us a lot of information today. What's the latest?
Well, one of the things that was resolved by the public safety director in a news conference that ended a short time ago is that there were no bombs found inside. There had been some reports that suspicious packages had been found and there could be bombs inside, improvised explosive devices. Bomb squads were sent in. They checked those packages out and there weren't any. So no evidence of that. And apparently the scene is pretty well cleared now. Also, authorities have told us that Bowers, the gunman, was wounded, shot once, we believe, by police in this exchange of gunfire before he surrendered and is now in the hospital. So whether or not they've been able to question him, I don't know, because we don't know the severity of his injuries. We don't know if he's undergoing surgery for that wound. Undoubtedly, they'll try to talk to him. But in the meantime, we had started to look at his social media postings, and some law enforcement people were also directing us toward them. His social media is rife with anti-Semitic comments and also bragging about the weapons that he had. But it should be pointed out in the climate that we're in, especially what we've just been through in the past week, that his hate is directed in many different directions. He also talks about his dislike for President Trump, saying that he is a globalist, not a nationalist, a reference to the president calling himself recently a nationalist, and also saying that there can be no Make America Great Again as long as, and then he makes a very offensive Jewish slur. So his hate was pointed in many directions on the social media that law enforcement has basically confirmed to us is his. And he also on the social media talks a lot about the weapons that he has. So if it's in fact the timing of this is driven by who knows what, to the extent that he was thinking rationally at all, he seems to be focused on an effort by a Jewish organization that brings in refugees calling refugees an infestation and saying that that had something to do with the timing. But again, who knows whether that's a rational thought at all.
All right, NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams, and again, touching on the issue of the weapons that this man owned. We know that he brought at least 3 with him, an AR-style weapon, a long gun has been referred to by Jim Kavanaugh, and also 2 handguns.